Today we're going to spend some time reflecting on the immune system of a certain flying mammal. We're going to talk all about that and so much more on today's episode of Short Stories of Bacteria. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Short Stories of Bacteria. It is I, your host, Dr. K, and I'm here to guide you through another story chronicling the lives of the tiny and the infamous, and that is, of course, the amazing and the incredible bacteria and all such related organisms. Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially back from this incredibly long hiatus since the last episode. I think it's been over a month since our last episode, and that's because things have been utterly crazy in the Dr. K household. But there's so many cool things to update you on. Very happy, very excited that Dr. K and Dr. Mrs. K are very happy to welcome into the world Dr. K Jr. We just had our first born just a little while ago, so very exciting stuff. Very excited to bring him into the Dr. K-verse and teach him all about things related to bacteria and viruses and all such manner of things. But as you maybe can gather, things have been pretty crazy, so that's why I've been out for such a long time. But I have returned because, as it turns out, science does not stop just because you have a kid. Science keeps on churning out more and more papers, and I have been reading so many papers, and there's so much content to get through, guys. There are so many cool stories about bacteria, even remotely related to bacteria. I'm going to look at some of these. I'm just going to list off some of the titles that I want to get to at some point. We're going to talk about microbes in space, how they can help us survive in space for a little bit longer. Maybe we'll talk about how bacteria can eat plastics and digest things that should not be digestible for whatever reason. We're going to come a little bit closer to home and spend a little bit of time talking about how the microbiomes of your friends are changing you and how you're changing the microbiomes of your friends. There's so much science that is currently emerging, and I'm so excited to talk with you guys about every single one that I can possibly get my hands on and keep spreading the word on just all this really neat science related to bacteria and viruses and all these matter of things. Now, the one that I've had on the back burner for some time, that's the one that we're going to talk a little bit about today, and it actually has to do, it's less to do with the we're not going to be looking specifically at the bacteria or the viruses in this paper. It's more like just an example of how other organisms are able to interact with their microbiome and all the other microbial organisms that are floating around. Although I guess you can't really say that viruses are an organism; they're not technically alive. At least that is where I fall in that debate. But you know what? Let's actually just jump into this. First, don't forget, hit that like, share, subscribe button if you're listening to this on YouTube, or if you're listening to this on some other podcast medium, for example, such as Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Don't forget to hit that follow button. I'm just gonna take a second, guys. I'm so happy to be back and speaking to you guys, my audience, right now. I know I have that little shtick that I go through at the start of every single episode, and I'm so excited to finally be getting back into this and talking with you guys about this. I will say I might be a little bit rusty because I haven't done a podcast in such a long time, but bear with me. Thank you for your patience. Thank you so much, as always, for your support. And let's jump into the actual science, hey? Okay, so let's spend a little bit of time thinking about bats. So as it turns out, bats, and I'm sure you know what a bat is. It's the flappy mammal. It turns out, and I actually didn't know this for a good long while, it turns out that bats have incredible longevity, right? Bats are able to survive way longer than you would suppose, given their size, given the fact that they're a mammal, right? So they live a lot longer than they probably should. In fact, there's this really cool statistic that I found that when adjusted for size, there are 19 species of mammals that are longer lived than humans. One of them is the naked mole rat. The rest are all bats. Bats, for whatever reason, have incredible longevity. They get less cancer. As we're going to see, they're extremely resistant to viruses. They have these really interesting immune systems. And all these things together, as you concatenate all those together, you end up with mammals that are really able to survive for a really long time. So they have incredible longevity. Now, as I mentioned a second ago, a key component of this is being able to have a strong immune system, being able to integrate your interactions with your microbiome, to be able to interactions with your microvirome, all these different things. And having a strong immune system, or I guess strong immune system isn't even the right word. It's more like an integrated immune system, a well-integrated immune system is fundamental to having strong longevity. We're going to spend a little bit of time just talking about the human immune system. The way the human immune system, I guess it's a multifaceted thing. There's a whole gaggle of different aspects to the human immune system. There's two general bins. There's so-called adaptive immunity, and then there's so-called innate immunity. Innate immunity, that's like the first line of defense. So whenever you get infected with a virus or a bacteria or something like this, the thing that's making the first responders, if you will, of your immune system is going to be your innate immune system. So they'll run into the thing and then they'll start destroying the bacteria or destroying the virus. The other side is the adaptive immune system. So those guys are going to do is once they come in contact with the bacteria or virus for the first time, then they're going to process it. And then they're going to send word throughout the rest of the immune system saying, okay, if you ever run into somebody that looks like this, right, be sure to kill it. So it's adaptive. It's able to pick up and learn from its environment. Now, this is a really, really awesome immune system. As I mentioned, there's only 19, one scale for size, 19 mammals that are able to survive longer than we are. So we actually have a really, really good immune system. But it's possible sometimes that you can have an immune system that's slightly overreactive, right? Oftentimes when people are running into issues with bacteria, it's less about the bacteria killing us. It's more about our immune system freaking out about the amount of bacteria that we're running into and then overreacting, right? So there's a whole issue with having an overreactive immune system. Now, bat immunity, on the other hand, is not like human immunity. The bat immune system is incredibly, incredibly good, right? And utilizes this incredible immune system as a way of surviving and increasing its longevity. Now, one thing that's unique about bat immunity, and you actually wouldn't even think that they would have good immunity just based off of the fact that bats are what are called viral reservoirs. Viral reservoirs. And what a viral reservoir is, it's just it's basically, it houses tons of different viruses, right? So we obviously have a microvirome, so we have viruses that are in contact with us all the time, just like we have bacteria that are in contact with us all the time. But not most of them at any given point in time, at least the ones that are overrunning us, those tend to not be like really deadly viruses like rabies or Ebola or COVID or SARS or anything like this, right? Bats are not like that. Bats are very, very unique viral reservoirs insofar as they're overrun with extremely deadly viruses. They are overrun by rabies. They are overrun by Ebola. They are overrun by the Warburg virus of all things. There's tons and tons of really intense, really deadly viruses that just live in bats, which is utterly ridiculous. It's actually because of this that bats are the source for so many diseases. So the current going theory among scientists right now is that there is some kind of spillover event between bats and humans and that's what started the COVID virus. Right, similar type of thing, possibly with the SARS virus back in the early 2000s, right? There are these, because bats are overrun with all these different kinds of viruses, there are these moments where they can spill over into the human population, and that's where we get a lot of these different diseases. Similar type of thing happens with other animals, like there's outbreaks in pigs, there's outbreaks in horses, there's outbreaks in a whole bunch of other different organisms, and all these are coming from bats because bats, for whatever reason, they have this really, really, they hold on to tons of these deadly viruses. Now, you're obviously asking at this point, Dr. K, very, very curious, why is it that all the other human beings and all the other people are all dying from these viruses, but bats are just holding on to so many viruses and they're able to just survive? Now, this is a really, really great question. And honestly, we're still trying to figure out the nuts and bolts of it because it's a very, very complex question, right? Now, there are some things that we can work with. There is a theory about linking up the ability for a bat to be able to withstand viruses and their ability to fly. Now, what does this mean? So, as it turns out, you may know this from the last time you randomly flew, flying is extremely metabolically expensive. extremely metabolically expensive. You burn through so much as a flying organism, or if you were a flying organism, you're burning through tons and tons of energy whenever you're doing flight. The bat itself, the heart rate of the bat usually, it clocks in, to my understanding, it's about 200 beats per minute. But when you start flying, the bat heart rate just soars up. It goes over 1,000 beats per minute, which is ridiculous. Bats it jumps up to like 4 or 5 times their normal heart rate. Wait, you know what? Actually, let's do this real quick. I have a calculator to figure out 1,000 divided by 66. So that's 16 beats per second. 16 beats per second, right? They're just blazing. They're burning through so much energy as they're doing their flying. Now, there was a going theory for a little while that as bats started flying, right, they had this huge increase in their heart rate, and that induced a so-called flight fever, where you would increase, kind of like a normal human fever, where you're increasing your temperature, and that's what's killing the viruses. And so then the thought process would be, okay, you have bats that are overrun with all these different viruses, and so then they undergo flight, and that pares down the level of these viruses, right, to the point where it's not actually causing any kind of issue for the bat. Now, this is actually it's an interesting thought, but it's actually unlikely. If you look at the levels of virus pre and post flight, they tend to stay similar, or at least they don't decrease as much as you would think, according to this flight fever hypothesis. But there does seem to be, and this is what this new paper that came out. Yikes! Let's find out how old this is, because it can't be that old. I haven't been at that. It came out in January. Wait, hang on one second. Yeah, the 29th of January of 2025. Okay, so that's not too old, but that's a long time in terms of science time, I guess. So this paper just came out a couple months ago, and that was trying to establish again a link between this flying, the presence of flying, and their ability to withstand the high levels of virus. Now, the game plan, the current hypothesis now looks something like this. And it actually relates to flying then. It relates to the fact that it's so metabolically expensive. When bats are flying around, flippy-flapping around, and they have this high-octane metabolism going, right? It's kind of like if you were to work out really, really intensely. Whenever you work out really, really intensely, you're going to be making these inflammatory byproducts just as a byproduct of you doing your workout. Right? And a similar type of thing happens with bats, but it's happening at a much, much higher scale because their metabolism is going absolutely nuts, right? So the bats start flying, they're producing tons of these inflammatory byproducts, and that can ultimately be toxic to the bat. Now, ultimately what has to happen in the immune system, in just either you or in the bat, is your immune system has to clear and clean up all those different inflammatory byproducts. Now, the bats, because they're flying so much of the time, that means that immune system that's clearing up all those inflammatory byproducts has to be extremely strong, has to be extremely robust. It has to be humming along at a really, really good clip. And so the current hypothesis then is that because the immune system is already humming along, going on at a good clip, just working extremely, extremely well, just to keep up with the natural movement of bats because they're flapping so much, because of that, because their immune system is so strong and so effective, just maintaining a population of viruses just isn't a big deal to it, right? So the bats then, according to this theory, they're overrun with the viruses, but the immune system is so strong that it's just like, I really don't care about the viruses all that much. If the viruses start to move up, increase just a little bit, the immune system can just like slap it down, and it doesn't really have to worry about it. It's almost like an afterthought. It's a wild hypothesis. It's just the idea that the immune system for the bat is just too good, and that taking care of the viruses on the side of maintaining the bat during flight is just the fact that you can just maintain a viral population, just almost like an afterthought, is so crazy. But as I mentioned, there's a lot more information that we need to pick up from this. Obviously, this just brings up even more questions that I would love to have answered. But that's an utterly crazy thing. The fact that bats have such a wacky immune system, the fact that they're able to maintain themselves as viral reservoirs is super crazy. But you know what? I've yapped enough for one day. We're looking at, oh my gosh, we're already at 15 minutes. Yikes. Okay. Well, there'll be more opportunities to talk about science another day. So let's wrap this up and get out of here. Number one, as it turns out, bats live for a really, really long time. This is oftentimes due to their ability to handle different kinds of viruses, right? So where normal viruses will kill humans and other animals, bats are able to handle these viruses really well. Our second point was that one theory as to why they're able to handle viruses really well is due to the fact that bats are able to fly, and the flying, because it kicks up their metabolism so much, induces some kind of flight fever, which brings down the level of viruses. Although this is currently it's not the most contemporary hypothesis. And finally, number three, our new hypothesis is that the demands of flying require that bats have an incredibly strong, incredibly potent, incredibly robust immune system, and that strong, robust immune system is able to maintain a population of viruses to the point where it just doesn't really pose a threat for the bat anymore. Essentially, it's impervious to its own viral load. So, utterly crazy stuff. Next time you're thinking about bats, don't think about Batman or any other ridiculousness. Just think about the fact that those bats are able to maintain wild viral populations, likely due to the fact that they evolved this flying ability. But enough of that. Guys, thank you so much, as always, for your support. Thank you so much for tuning in. And I will talk with you guys again next time on another episode of Short Stories of Bacteria.